Hello and welcome to Rethinking Freedom. I am your host, Aya Fabarinelli, and I am excited that you have joined us for yet another episode where we are challenging all of us to rethink freedom. What do we think freedom is? What does it look like? And what actions do we need to take to be free? Because wherever you may be in the world today, what is clear is that our freedoms are at risk. In fact, I was listening to a journalist who was sharing that right now, according to whatever metrics they use, 72% of all so-called democratically elected governments are leaning towards authoritarianism. So it's like more than ever, we need to be paying attention to what we must do to be free. And here on this channel, we address a lot of topics, politics, of course, but a lot of different ways that we can be free. And one of my loves is to garden. And today we have an amazing guest. I wish we lived closer to each other because I would be in and out of her garden and getting her help and all of that. But I would like to introduce a guest to you today who is going to help us rethink and reimagine what role growing our own food and how we eat and all of that plays in our quest for freedom. So, ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome to Rethinking Freedom none other than Karen Louden. How are you, sis?
Good morning. I'm fine. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It is so good to have you on this show. From the minute that Babatunde orchestrated this whole piece for me to host this show, which was never anything that was on my radar, I knew that I was going to ask you to be a guest on the show. So we have met in person, thank God, and had a marvelous time in Kemet. Some of you may know it as Egypt a few years ago. But really what drew me to you was this love that you have for growing things, even though that is not your main profession. So before I get ahead of myself, tell our listeners, our audience, a little bit about who you are, and then we can get to our love, the plants.
Yes. Well, good morning. And again, thank you for having me. I always think of myself as an ordinary person, a regular person who has a regular job, lives in a regular house, in a regular neighborhood. And yet I've always felt like the odd man out, so to speak. I'm a mother, a professional, a wife, a daughter. And yet I always felt like I wasn't really connected. I tend to be a loner anyway, but there was something missing. At first I thought, well, I'm just shy. But
Which
as
you are not.
I was going to say, that's not really the case. But there was an undercurrent, an underlayment in my life that I wasn't connecting with. And it's funny because my mother is the kind of person who she looks at concrete and things grow. But I never got that I thought I didn't get that from her until I married and had kids and had my own place and wanted to start decorating with houseplants. And it just kind of grew from there because I lived in apartments a lot. When I finally got my own home, which was actually only about 15 years ago, I had my own little space. And I think that it led me to understand that what I needed was a little space and some quiet to really observe and pay attention and slow down. And in doing so, I started to listen. I started to listen to the silence, which, if you've been in a garden, it isn't really ever silent. There's insects, there's birds, there's passersby, there's the wind. And it awakened in me an understanding that what I was missing was my appreciation for and awareness of being part of everything.
Oh, wow.
You're not, we have this in Western cultures, in Western society, this idea that there's man versus nature. There's nature and then there's humans. There's no such thing.
That part.
You yourself are a universe. If you look at your scalp,
Mm.
the hair on the different parts of your scalp have different textures because you yourself are an entire galaxy. And when you start to feel a connection to everything, it changes your perspective on everything in life. So it led me to, like most people, growing some tomatoes, some herbs in a few pots. Next thing you know, I was tearing up the whole yard, pulling up the grass. And it just grew from there. So now that's my obsession. That's my passion. That's my love, is growing, particularly things that are edible, that are medicinal, culinary, and that are just beautiful.
Wow. So I love how you told that whole story. So much of what you shared. First of all, this sense of sometimes when we don't have our own place. As you were talking, I was thinking about when you said, I had my own space. I was thinking, the freedom to have a space that you can do what you want to with it to an extent. So I live in an area that's a homeowners association. Behind my walls, don't know what's going on there. And I grow all kinds of stuff in front. I still have to have the green grass and all of that, but I cannot wait to move out to a place that doesn't even have those restrictions. Because, I think about if I'm not feeding goats or sheep or cows or whatever, why am I growing grass? Like in America, you literally grow grass, you fertilize the grass, you water the grass with sprinklers, then you pay someone to come cut the grass. But the whole time we could have been growing food. It's yeah. Anyway, so thank you for sharing that, but then also what it means to be in the garden and to understand that how are you going to be at war with the thing that nurtures you? Like that's insanity.
Mm-hmm.
This and for those of us who grew up in the Christian faith, this whole thing, man, go and dominate the world. I want to go back to what the original word was. Was it really dominate? Because you have to understand you are part of it. You destroy yourself. So it is spring all over the United States and our part of the hemisphere. I know it's a different season in some other places. For that person who was saying, yeah, I think I want to grow things, but where do I start? Or people who have convinced themselves I have a brown thumb. I just look at a plant and it dies. But yet they need to live to, eat to live. What advice, if any, how did you get started, and what advice could you give our listeners?
Well, I would first say you've got to change the narrative of yourself. I happen to have a sister who insists that she has a black thumb because when she was in first or second grade,
You must
and
not know that a black thumb, that you need black dirt to really grow stuff. A black thumb must be good. I'm just saying, but anyway, go ahead.
they had a project in
Sorry.
school. No problem. They had a project in school where every kid was given a bean and they were supposed to soak it and put it in dirt and grow it. And hers was the only one that died. It died because maybe it
That's
was,
pretty tough to do, though.
yeah, beans want to grow. They're one of the easiest things in the world to grow. But from that whole experience, can you imagine thinking your entire life that you kill things and that you can't grow? But it became part of her narrative and the story she told about herself. And so you first have to understand that, Jurassic Park, they call Jurassic Park, life finds a way. Things want to grow. Life wants to live. It just does. And that includes you. So you don't have to have, I'm sorry, seems like I tapped out for a second there. You don't have to have any particular skills or knowledge or be, trained specially to grow something. And you also don't have to have your own space, because one of the accusations that gardeners get, that people that are into gardeners, homesteaders get, is that it's a luxury. It's something, it's a hobby. It's something that you do if you have the luxury of space, if you have a yard, if you can buy a farm. And so people think, oh, I can't afford it, so I can't do it. All you have to do is think holistically. What do you like to eat? What is beautiful to you? And then get yourself a pot, get some seeds, and it doesn't have to be an expensive pot, your dollar store pot. It can be a leftover bucket. It can be beans from the grocery store. It can be a tomato from the grocery store or a ripe bell pepper. Stick it in some dirt. That's all you have to do.
That is all you have to do. I try to post things on my Facebook page relating to this, bought cabbage from the store, cut everything but that last core of it, set it in a bowl with water. A few days later, it's got a root system. A couple of weeks later, I transplanted into the garden. I've got a cabbage plant. Right now I have bell peppers. I cooked the bell pepper, but I took that core with the seeds and I didn't even dry them. I didn't do anything fancy. I just threw it in a pot and covered it with dirt. The unfortunate part of it is now I have like 30 bell pepper plants all bunched up together. And so I'm having to thin them out and make enough room so I can actually dig it up and transplant it. But literally that one bell pepper, if I really wanted to, I could have 30 bell pepper plants. I don't eat that many bell peppers, although I do give food away. But yeah, I think the way, growing up, and I don't know if you or any of our listeners can relate to this, growing up, most of the people around me, especially the much older people, so like my grandparents' generation, had gardens. Like everybody, even if it was, like you said, in some throwaway bucket, whatever, people grew things. And there was a relationship that we had with food, as opposed to now just everything is sanitized, or we think it's sanitized in a certain way at the grocery store. We know it isn't because we keep hearing about all these E. coli breakouts and things like that. But it's almost like we have lost that connection to our food, that we don't have that intimacy with our food anymore. And so there are times when they will remain unnamed members of my family, and I'll say, yeah, just go out to the garden and grab so-and-so, and they'll come back like, which one is it? And I'm like, oh my God. Like, because they're looking for it to look exactly as it does in the packaging in the store. But tell us a little bit more about this disconnect and why we need to reconnect.
Well, I know it's probably true of other cultures as well, but for African Americans in particular, we know that farming and agriculture is, in our minds, connected to slavery. And to escape the country, to escape having to grow, to escape having to pick and harvest crops, it's become embedded in our minds that you're moving up in the world. You're elevating yourself to a different social class. But I remember riding to school when I could afford the Metro. Those of you who are watching from Chicago, you know what I'm talking about. And you'd go through the south side of Chicago. And just quickly, the Metro is a little bit more of a luxurious train than our regular Dan Ryan 95th Street Red Line. It goes behind a lot of old brownstones and graystone buildings, which all have yards that back up to the train tracks. And it used to be that the grandmothers and the grandfathers and the parents that lived in those houses were Black before the area got gentrified. And everybody, and a lot of them were from down south, like my grandparents were. And everybody had a garden, a big, beautiful, lush garden with collard greens, tomatoes, everything. And when I would go to, in my current employment, to people's homes, whatever ethnic neighborhood you went to, Italian, Mexican, American, the grandparents would often have gardens in the back of the houses.
Yeah. And
one house in particular, I think, encapsulated for me a lot of what's happened, unfortunately. It was a big suburban house. So it was outside of the city. It was an Italian family. The grandmother had obviously insisted on having a little space carved out in the backyard for her zucchini and her tomatoes and it was beautiful. Everything else was that monotone, it's been chemically treated because nothing in nature grows like that grass. Because the kids had moved up in the world and they were out in the suburbs. And that means having a house which on a mini scale mimics the estates in Europe that aristocrats used to have, that had vast tracts of grass, because it was a sign of wealth to have all this land and not have to do anything with it. That's what we're imitating. It's ridiculous.
Teach us exactly. Where do these ideas come from and who do they serve? Yeah. Yeah. And so while we are trying to be like oligarchs that we're not, who, by the way, had other land masses or areas that were gardens, okay, who eat organic, while we were told initially, like just like breastfeeding. Oh, don't breastfeed. And then we find, go buy your milk from the store. Now we find out what we should always have known. God makes no mistakes. Your milk is the best milk for your child. But it's like we have now become so dependent on grocery stores. And now, of course, all across America and in other places, we have food deserts. And so even how this ties into our health issues and the healthcare disparities that we're seeing, when we don't grow anything, we actually don't have a relationship with fresh food anymore because we're so used to it coming out of a box in 3 minutes and dinner is ready. And then in areas where you don't even have grocery stores. And so I was at the gas station the other day and they were selling onions at the gas station. And I was like, and so I drove a little, I was there for a different city for court. And I just drove around a little bit and realized I'd driven about a 4-mile radius, didn't see any grocery stores. So the gas station, people are picking up canned goods and frozen goods, and I guess every once in a while some onions or fresh bananas. But this is what it's come to. So as we talk about rethinking freedom, what role do you see gardening or even being able to reconnect to eating fresh, if you will? What role do you think that plays in our quest for freedom?
Well, I think that, and of course, I would think this because I'm biased, but I think that it is the foundation of reconnecting with our true selves and truly being
Why would you
free.
say you're biased? Say that.
Because I'm a gardener and I love it, because I grow.
Oh, okay. Got
So,
you. I mean, facts are facts, though.
right. Yeah, I think that
But
that is the basis. That is the complete basis for freedom, because people that cannot feed themselves are not truly free. You are dependent. When COVID hit and all the stores shut down, you'd go to, especially places, the big stores, won't name any names, and people would have 2 and 3 carts. They'd bring their family members with them and have carts just full of meat, because everyone was terrified that they would have nothing to eat, meat and toilet paper. And yet that's probably going to make it worse, because you didn't have anything green in there. And when the farm workers were not available to pick the crops and there was no fresh food, you just going to eat meat. You're not a carnivore, not a pure carnivore. You can't survive off of beefsteak and chicken forever. You got to have some fiber in there. And if you understand and know, even on the simplest level, from just growing something in a little pot, where your food comes from, that a seed is the encapsulation of the regenerative life force of the universe. Just a little.
slow down. Say that again, real slow for all of us. Please say that again.
A seed is the encapsulation of the regenerative life force of the universe. Anything you grow comes from a teeny tiny seed. Even the most magnificently huge trees that you can find, even the sequoias and the redwoods. Pray for them, please, that they don't get razed to the ground by this current administration. Trees that are, I've personally walked among trees that are hundreds of years old. I walked past a tree trunk that was alleged to have been growing in the time of Moses. So I picked up some pine cones from that forest The seeds inside that grow those mighty trees are this big. So if you understand that everything alive starts from the tiniest life force and it can't be stopped, it cannot be stopped. And you have that power in your hand just by holding those seeds. You realize that you are free because you have the means to your own sustenance and survival and thriving. And I wish everyone would connect with that.
That's my wish. That was also the wish of Thomas Sankara. Some of you may know him. He was president of Burkina Faso. He was assassinated as a very young man. And one of the quotes from him is, he said, "A country that cannot feed itself is a country that is not free." You basically are at the whim and mercy of the people that you're getting your food from. And so whenever someone comes in and they say they're going to civilize you or they're going to help you, but they actually disconnect you from your land, they disconnect you from growing the things that you eat. You're growing flowers, and some flowers are edible, but it's like, truly, I have one area in my backyard that used to be like all like a flower garden, and I love flowers, and they're great for attracting the bees and pollinators and all of that. But the more I started growing edibles, food that you could actually eat, the more I was like, yeah, you got to go and you got to go, because I want to grow food. Again, and there's some flowers that I will plant in between my food, actually, like marigolds, because they help to keep pests away. But so for the person who's thinking now, okay, it's spring, can you give us a little bit more, like, step by step? How do they start? Maybe they live in an apartment, they can't do in-ground, whatever. Like, just where can they get started? How can they get started? And someone asked, is there a difference between hybrid and GMO seeds, or does it matter?
Well, I'll start with your last question. It matters in that with a hybrid seed, you're getting a seed that was carefully cultivated to produce, well, not even that. If you buy a plant that produces hybrids, it's been bred to produce that particular fruit. When you take the seeds from it, those seeds may not grow true to that parent plant because it's a hybrid. So you don't know what you're going to get. But that being said, whatever seeds you can get, grow them. The only seeds I'd avoid that didn't used to be available to the regular gardener are GMOs. We are guinea pigs in a giant experiment to control life itself. Don't put yourself in that laboratory. Don't do it. But for anyone getting started, if you want to start as a project with your kids, if you live in an apartment, if you don't have a lot of space, if you're just intimidated and you want to do something easy, I would say one of the most fun ways to get started is to do what you see on social media a lot, those experiments where you get some produce from the grocery store and you regrow it. I would recommend that if you can, you get organic, but you don't always have to. And if that's not available to you, don't let that intimidate you. Get yourself some dirt, whatever cheap dirt you can get from the dollar store or nurseries or big box stores that are selling now. Don't worry about getting the most expensive or the fanciest. Just get some dirt, get a pot, make sure it has some drainage holes in it, and stick some seeds in it. If you're getting something from the grocery store, even fresh herbs like basil or say some celery, cut it, put it in some water. Believe it or not, your basil will probably take root. The celery will start to grow. And then you do need the sunlight. So find yourself a sunny spot. And if you don't have one in your house, finagle a friend, a relative, somebody, your office space, if you have a window, and stick it in a sunny spot and let it grow.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. I think we make it a lot more complicated than it should be. I wanted to
Yeah.
show our listeners this. So I love potatoes, beans, all of those kind of things. I grow a lot of green things as well, but you know, there in Texas anyway, there comes that season where it's so hot. It's too hot for kale and broccoli and lettuce. All of those things will bolt. Um, and that's really when my okra will thrive. My tomatoes, I gotta hold them to keep them alive. The cucumbers are still gonna do good. Zucchini will do great, and squash if the vine borers haven't gotten to them. But potatoes thrive during this time as well. And I want to show you when, Karen, you just talked about a little experiment. So this was a sweet potato. I don't know if you guys can see that. It was a sweet potato. And I just cut it in half. It was a small sweet potato. And I stuck each half in water. And all I did was I put 3 toothpicks, if you guys can see that, to just suspend it in the cup, in the glass that it was put in. It's kind of outgrowing this one. And this is about 2 weeks. So you can see the root system that has formed. And you can also see some of the shoots at the beginning, at the top, if you will. These are called potato slips. And so what I'm going to do is, I really should have started it earlier, but hey, I'm not tripping. I'm in Texas. I have months to grow. So I'm going to probably leave this for another 4 weeks in the state. And at that time, I would easily have 6 to 8 what we call slips growing up. And I will separate the slips and then plant them. My first year of growing potatoes, I grew them in a grow bag. These were really inexpensive, felt like bags that I got online. I think I got like 10 for like $2 a bag or something of that nature. Like you said, I didn't go fancy with the soil. But what I did was I also put some of my compost, some leaves, some other things at the bottom, put the soil, put these slips in, and I was amazed at how much potato I harvested months later just from that. So that one potato ended up giving me, I have videos of it, but ended up giving me at least 30 or more potatoes. And I was like, oh my God, it is that simple. And so just get started where you can. Start with the things that you love to eat. So,
Yeah.
I do grow cucumbers and zucchini and those kind of things because I love to eat those kind of things. Just start somewhere, and the store-bought things will work just as well. When you have garlic in your fridge and it starts to grow a little shoot, put it in the soil. I mean, like literally, all of us have had potatoes that started to grow little
Yeah.
knobs and stuff.
I've got some now.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Please go ahead.
No, I said I've got some now.
Put it in the soil. So as we're talking about growing things and being a gardener, I know that you are also working with the community in Chicago. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing and the people you're working with and what you guys hope to achieve?
Well, I started last year and sadly broke my foot, so couldn't continue. But I'm working with a gentleman who runs Mary Helen Community Garden. It is, for those who want to drop by at some time, not between 97th and 98th Vincennes in Chicago, Vincennes Avenue in Chicago. And this is a little different than the community gardens that you typically see in Chicago, because I'm glad to say that Chicago, like a lot of major metropolitan areas, has a very thriving community garden scene. And there is a lot of support from the city government for them, a lot of support for urban agriculture as well. Most community gardens, or I'd say a lot of community gardens, are spaces where you can rent a plot, or there are combined efforts to grow and produce in the garden and then distribute or share the produce. This community garden, this gentleman started it in tribute to his mother. And so he's looking to kind of revitalize it and get the community more engaged in participation. So this year, my plan is to just kind of learn the basics, because you first have to know how to handle something on that larger scale. And I have some friends of my daughter, my youngest daughters, who want to volunteer and participate because they want to learn about growing. They're trying to connect with the natural environment. They're trying to learn, and it's an excellent opportunity to just get people involved first who have an interest in it, who either want to go into urban agriculture later, or grow their own garden, or help to feed communities. And young, I will say it's not limited to young people, because there's a lot of older people, retired people, who want to get back to doing this, something that they used to do in their youth, or used to do before they got caught up in child care and jobs and life. And so from learning from this gentleman, from starting to participate in working and taking care of this community garden, I have had people just walk by and say, "Oh, what are you growing? What are you doing? What's this garden for?" I've had people who, a relative of mine, my husband, one of my kids, has mentioned to them, "Oh, my wife, my mom, my daughter, my friend grows plants or works in a community garden." And they have said, "Well, I work with school children who have a little garden plot at the school, and they grow seedlings and then they take them home at the end of the year." Or, "How would you like to participate in the farmer's market," which is something I'm doing this year, to sell garden starts for people to grow food at home. I find that I didn't really have to do much to become engaged with the community. I just had to know they were there, and they just had to be aware of me, because everybody's looking for something, and lots of people are looking for healthier food, connection to nature, something therapeutic that calms them, or a hobby, something to uplift the community or be more self-sufficient. And community gardens are all of that. So I'm really just getting into my journey with community gardens, but already so much has come to me, and I've been able to engage with so many people.
Wow. So again, as you were talking here, I'm thinking freedom. I'm thinking of how we're never really free in isolation, how we must connect with one another, how community gardens can absolutely be that place where we are learning, growing, connecting, building, getting stronger, really, and how it is such a perfect place for intergenerational interaction. Right? It's like, it's not, "Oh, I can't understand this." It's like you can be two years old and be taught something. You could be 98 years old and you're learning and imparting knowledge. And that was just the picture that was coming to mind. But as you were also talking, I was thinking about times when I've talked to people who live in places that are very restrictive. I mean, you can't even grow stuff on your balcony and so on and so forth. And community gardens is a way, like, yeah, if where you actually live has these restrictions, a community garden might be a way to overcome that obstacle. I know that in a community not too far from me, there are a group of women. They happen to be Black women, but there are many other people doing the same kind of work. And what they're doing is identifying like abandoned lots of land. And instead of it just being, a place where maybe other nefarious things are taking place, they get the owner to allow them to grow food there. And the food they grow is open to the entire community. So I actually went on a tour of some of these community gardens with them. And I mean, there were tomatoes like this big. I'm not kidding. And they were like, "Yeah, you can just take it and you can come back anytime." And I love to make my own tomato puree and all of that. So I went back a few times because I grow my own tomatoes, but not as much as what they had. And so they're just really, there's so much we can do around gardening that I think could be very helpful to us as we talk freedom. Anything else you would like to add to that?
Yes. If it was up to me, everyone who has a yard, who has some space, who has access to space would be growing something in it that, even if it's what we call ornamental or decorative, beauty feeds your soul. But I, of course, prefer that it be something that's also edible. You mentioned earlier that you have a space where you have ornamental flowers and they're just beautiful. Okra flowers are some of the most beautiful flowers I've ever seen.
Are. And they're edible too. I didn't
Yes.
know that until recently.
And see, and I'm going to have to ask you about that later, because can you eat the flower but still get the okra? That's the thing. I
Well,
think
see, that's the problem. Okay, so I had that problem because last year, for the first time, I grew passion fruit. And because it has all these medicinal purposes, well, I really like the passion flower tea. And so, because I used to buy it in the stores, but I was like, now I'm growing my own passion flower. So as soon as I saw a passion flower, I'm harvesting it, I'm dry, all that stuff. And so then a friend of mine, I'd post about my passion flower tea, and she was like, oh yeah, and she's like, I have the flowers and I have lots of fruit as well. And I'm thinking, oh, well, maybe it takes since this is my first year growing it, maybe it takes a couple of years to get the fruit. And then I go research and I find out, no, you've plucked all the flowers. So you didn't get any fruit. So yes, with your okra, if you want to have fruit, don't go and eat all the flowers. You will not have any fruit. At least that's how it's worked out in my garden. Maybe you have a different experience, but no. Yeah, first comes the flower, then the fruit. So if you harvest the flower, you may not get the fruit.
You're out of luck. You're out of luck.
Yeah.
There's no reason. And this to me will eventually transform communities, because one of the things I love about Chicago is that Chicago is a city of neighborhoods. And most people don't understand just how tremendously huge Chicago is. Each neighborhood, each area, each ward is almost the size of a small town. But it's easy to find your way around Chicago most times because it's laid out on a grid. East, west, north, south, north, south. You almost cannot get lost in this city. And you have all these of houses with these decorative lawns. Every single one of those lawns should have something in it edible. Every single one. Just imagine, even the smallest yards, because people think, well, I've got to have a big yard, I've got to have a lot of space. No, you don't. If you lived on a block with 10 other houses, and 3 of y'all grew tomatoes, and 3 of y'all grew cucumbers, and 3 of y'all grew herbs, you gotta, and 3 of you grew lettuce, you got a salad. Everybody eats salad for the entire season. It doesn't have to be, and this is how homesteading and gardening are really being pushed now. It doesn't have to be that everybody grows everything for themselves and every family is trying to meet their own individual needs. That's the way we've been kept under control and manipulated. That's not how most people in most cultures have lived throughout history. You simply cannot survive with each little family unit trying to do everything only for itself.
Yeah. So for some of our more quote unquote seasoned gardeners, there are questions about how to keep your soil healthy, how to keep pests away, whether they should have more information about, is there something about companion planting or crop rotation? People are just like, well, what should we be doing? Because I've been growing, but like the second year doesn't look like my crops did as well as the first year. So what advice do you have for those people who have gotten past the I'm afraid of planting anything? And before you answer that question, I do want to point to something that you said. You talked about selling starter plants. So for those of you watching, listening, you don't have to start from seed with everything. This year, I did not start quite a few of my tomato plants from seed because life. What is so funny about it, though, is that I have so many bonus tomato plants from last year. I really shouldn't have gone and bought plants because I've got tomato plants popping up everywhere. But the point, though, is I like to go to our Master Gardener event that they have at the beginning of each spring, and it's other gardeners who have grown excess stuff and they've got all these starter plants. and they sell them, and they use that profits for some other things that the master gardeners do. So don't think like, oh, if I didn't start from seed, it's too late for me. No, you can still go to wherever, whatever you want to grow is sold, and still get those plants, and then, continue. So now that I've said that, let's get to, for those more advanced gardeners, if you will, who are concerned about soil quality, concerned about their production, year to year. What advice would you give them?
Now, I'm going to give a little bit different advice than you normally hear, because companion planting is great. A lot of the standard tips of leaving once you've harvested, leaving at least the roots of your plants in the soil over the winter, if you have a winter season, or until your next growing season, so that they can help aerate the soil as they decay and give food to worms. You can find a lot of that on the internet. You can find a lot of that in gardening books. But what I'm going to say is, we live in a system where uniformity is valued above all things. But in the natural world, there is nowhere you're going to go where it's an entire landscape of one thing. Even if visibly you think there is, that's all you see, there's much more going on. And anywhere you go in the United States in particular, if you see like just rows and rows and rows of the same type of tree, that's because it doesn't look like it did before the land was colonized, because that's not a natural forest.
Oh, so wait a second. You're saying we not only colonize people, we colonize land?
Colonize all life, because that's the point of colonizers, is to colonize everything. When they first got here, what they thought was wild, untamed forest, where the native peoples actually lived and were obviously thriving, were food forests. Because what the people were doing was they were observing nature, and they were working with nature and following the natural growth patterns of what they were trying to cultivate. So there'd be different trees, and there'd be different, just to give an example, in the spring, before everything starts growing, when you get those first heavy rain and you get that first ground cover, that crops up serves a purpose. It's shading the ground and covering it so that the moisture doesn't immediately evaporate. So those things that are perennial, that have to absorb moisture over a longer period of time, have time to absorb that moisture. So I would say the long and short of it is, for those who are more experienced with growing and you're having issues with your soil, you want some tips. First of all, have patience. Slow yourself down with patience, because nature has all the time in the world. And with you trying to rush and just have a few things here and there, or grow the same type of thing over and over again, you're trying to speed up the natural process. And that's why you're running into problems. And the second thing is diversity. That's where the companion planting idea comes from. It's really not this plant is best next to this plant and this plant helps this plant. It's that everything works in conjunction with each other. And what you need to do is mimic natural patterns by planting those things that complement each other and serve each other. And you'll end up solving your problems. If you, for example, have a lot of dandelions cropping up, no matter what you do, it's because there's a deficiency in your soil that those deep dandelion roots dig down to bring up to the surface. So they are serving a purpose, and they are telling you what's going on with your soil. So there's no such thing as a weed. Every plant is doing something. And you just have to know what it is. And that will tell you what to do next.
Wow. Okay, so how'd you get this smart about plants in gardening? We want to know. No, seriously, because you didn't grow up doing this. So what's your secret?
Well, I will say in this age of internet everything, I read a lot. I read a lot. Um, I was trained to do research, and that's one good thing. Well, it's not the only good thing, but it's one really good thing I got out of my formal education. One of the expressions I hate the most hearing these days is do your own research, because for most people, they don't understand what that means. If you read a research study, for example, how do you know that the conclusions are valid? What was their purpose in engaging in that study? And who's paying for it? You need to know that before you call yourself trusting or following any advice or results of any research study. So I read a lot, I know how to research, and most of all, most importantly, I learn from those who are doing it and already know. And I listen and pay attention to what the land and the plants are telling me. All you have to do is watch.
And who do we know in history who was a master? Well, one of the ones who we acknowledge, a master at listening to the land and the plants.
Absolutely.
Dr. George Washington Carver.
Mhm.
Amazing.
When he said, when he was asked, how do you know so much? Well, the plants tell me. They do. We think language is just verbalizing because that's what humans do. And of course, we in our hierarchical thinking, what humans do is, the epitome of what everything should do. But plants don't have lips. They communicate with you in different ways. And they'll tell you, I'm struggling. I don't like what's next to me. You're pissing me off. The weather's cold, too cold. You grew me too early. You grew me too late. You just got to pay attention.
Yeah, I learned that you grew me too late real quick with cilantro bolting on me. I love cilantro. And I'm still trying to figure out how I can have it year round where I'm growing it, not buying it at the store. Because once it gets to a certain temperature here in Texas, I've tried in bulbs. I've tried to plant it in a pot and keep it indoors and all of that stuff. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, I'm going to have to let me insert on you, though. That is one of our main problems. Now,
yes,
I will admit that I'm going to grow things that I love and that I really want. I'm going to try really hard. But we assume that we can transplant ourselves and what we want anywhere we go. If it's not the natural season for it, if it's not the natural climate for it, if it's invasive where you're growing it, stop trying. I mean, I love squash. I'm going to try to grow some
stop
squash.
looking for stuff out of season.
But there's a reason why squash bugs are so prevalent. Where did the squash come from that we now grow? Who brought it here? The pests are like, they're not pests. They are a response to what we're doing. So,
wait a second. That's novel. Wait a second. The pests are not, the bugs are not pests, because the ones trying to eat my cabbage right now because it's gotten too hot too quick in Texas, I don't like them. I mean, I know they're little cute caterpillars that will grow into moths, but they do a lot of damage. So
yes,
I shouldn't see them as a pest.
No, they're a response to what you're doing. And there's a lady I follow on YouTube, and I wish I could remember her name because she's a wealth of knowledge. She lives in Jamaica, and I always wondered, cabbage is very popular in Jamaica. It's in everything. They love it, and she grows it all the time because there's varieties of cabbage that grow well in the heat. I never knew that. There's so much
wait a second. I need that in my life.
Cultivated to steer us in certain directions. And if you don't
I need that cabbage in my life.
Yes, I'm going to find out what it is. I'll let you know, because why aren't we growing it here? We just assume, you can't grow cabbage. Of course you can.
I for sure need that cabbage in my life. Okay. For me, there's so many benefits to gardening, and I'm just wondering if you, with the time we have left, can talk a little bit about what some of those benefits are for you and for that person who is going, because I have one in my family who's like, ew, it's dirty, there are worms, I want to be outdoors. But I can list off a whole bunch of ways that just being out in the garden have have transformed my life, has transformed my life. And I'm just wondering what you see as the benefits of gardening beyond what we've talked about, and how that ties into our liberation, our desire to be free.
Mm. I'm gonna be vulnerable here.
Mm.
When COVID shut everything down, me already being kind of a little bit of a loner in that I'm comfortable in my own company, didn't initially realize just how isolated I would feel and how restricted I would feel in and afraid.
Mm.
And my soul cried out, and I threw myself into gardening because the sunlight and the wind and the fresh air and even the rain and the mud and the dirt and the bugs and everything was so alive. It was so alive. And whether you want to call it spirit, universal divine energy, God, that's where it is. It's not in a building, at least not for me. It's not in a
Mm.
structure. It's not in the covers. It's not between the covers of a book that someone says is the only way to access and learn about and know God. It's in life itself. And a garden is more than just a food source or a hobby. It is life itself. And when you are in your garden, when you are walking through grass with no shoes on your feet, when you are at a public park, if that's where you have to go, you are reminded every day that no matter what we do, no matter what stupid mistakes we make, no matter what systems we follow or those who try to control us, you can't control life. You cannot. And the power and majesty and flow of it is everything. And you are part of that. And that's what gardening did for me. It brought me and my soul back to life and in community with everything.
Thank you for sharing that, Karen. Wow, I'm telling you, you're just transporting me back to things that I haven't thought of for a while. So, unfortunately, my husband and I experienced 4 miscarriages, like back to back, and gardening was what reconnected me to myself. I was so disconnected and so much in pain. And we'd moved to Illinois, actually, not too far from where you live, a couple of hours from where you live.
If only I
And
knew.
I know. And there were all these, the home that we bought, there were all these overgrown beds. And I would just get up, before dawn, really. It's just as the sun was starting to rise. And I would stop working in this garden. And I would, on a daily basis at that time, I was sick with some other things. I wasn't working outside of the home. And I would easily spend 3 hours every morning in the garden, just
Mhm.
learning what the plants were, figuring out which ones I wanted to leave. If you have yarrow, be very careful. Yarrow is invasive. It takes over everything, but it has these really beautiful flowers. But anyway, and I'm telling you, in that place, me tending the plants and hands in the soil, and I like to be barefoot, so feet in the dirt as well. I felt like every time I was in the garden, God was meeting me there.
Mhm.
And through the pain of all the losses, I just felt so worthless. And I felt like God was saying, look around you as you are in nature. Look how I fed that sparrow. Look how I fed this. Look at even this worm here, and so on and so forth. If I can care for and provide for them, you think I'm not here for you as well in the midst of your adversity? And then he would show me, like, those trees where you look at them and they're like bent this way, but then they're still growing. And you're
Yeah.
just like, can you imagine the trauma that this tree experienced? But this tree is like, I ain't dead yet. and there's still birds nesting in it, even though it's kind of crooked and so on and so forth. And it was such a place of rejuvenation for me. Um, and at that point, I was just planting ornamental flowers, ornamental plants, but I had a 4-season garden that
Mm,
became a joy for other people because people likes to walk past and just see, okay, what's growing now. So much so that they wanted to put me on that garden tour thing that they sometimes do in some cities, but I didn't want to be invaded in that way. So I didn't want yeah. So, but anyway, that was a place of comfort. And years later, when I started homeschooling my sons, and it was like science, duh, we tore up grass, put down cardboard to kill off the grass and everything. And we created this garden. And it was amazing because the boys would just go out and, like, oh, this is what we want in our omelet. And they would just pick, different things. There's spring onions and their bell peppers and jalapeno peppers and tomatoes and all of that, and go into the house and make something. We
mm,
started making selling zucchini bread because we had so much zucchini, and it was like, what can we do with it? And my son looked up, I'd never made zucchini bread. He looked up a recipe, and we're like, oh, this is good. Okay. And we started marketing that as well. So it became also a way for me to connect with my children, and, forever and ever, they will have that. And that's what I had with my mother. And even though I didn't plant for many seasons going through college and so on and so forth, it was in me and it came back. So again, we have a few minutes left here. Just anything you want to share from your heart with those who are already lovers of the soil and of plants, and for those who are still kind of on the fence. But any last words that you want to share, because you dropped so many gems for us already.
there's just so much. The world is alive, and
Mm,
gardening just tapping is us just tapping just a little bit into its living energy. And that living energy is us. It is everything. I'm just so full when I'm outside. And I've learned to love every season, to
mm,
find joy in every aspect of the weather, to appreciate and respect the power of nature and be humbled by it, but to understand that I am part of that magnificence and I am magnificence. I am magnificent not only in and of myself, but because of it. A tree, like you referenced earlier, that bends because it has to go around something or something hit it or got in its way, and it scabs over and has a knob. A tree doesn't not feel beautiful. A tree doesn't say, oh, now I'm ugly. It just reaches for the light. It just reaches for the light. And that is a lesson. That is a lesson. There are lessons all around us. You just have to pay attention.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It just reaches for the light. Okay, y'all can't see this, but my 17-year-old son, who is, of all my kids, probably the one, not probably, he is the gardener. He's the one who diagnoses my plants. He's the one who started us with chicken and all of that. He happened to be listening to you, Karen. And when a 17-year-old male is like, yeah, yeah, you really hit something there. That
I'm
that
humble.
that
Yeah.
that is amazing. Um, that is amazing. Thank you for sharing that. So what does the future hold for you? We've got about 30 seconds. Where can people find you if they want to tap more into this brilliance?
Don't have a big social media presence yet, but I will. You'll probably find me, and I don't even know my handle name on Instagram, louden.karen. Look for it. Maybe that's me. And I will be at the farmer's market, as I said, on 95th and Longwood in Chicago, starting May 4th for the month of May. So my plant starts behind me. Um, I'll be happy to talk to anybody. I love it. I want you to love it too.
Thank you, Karen. This has been such a treat. I'm going to go back and listen because I was taking notes, but I need to focus more. We love you. Thank you so much. And we look forward to all the amazing things that you're going to be doing out in these spaces. Thank you.